So when I was 10 years old, I got a tattoo. And you might be wondering, why on earth would a 10-year-old get a tattoo? And the answer lies in the significance of that evening. But I'm going to pause here just for a moment, because I'd like to ask you to think about something. Have you ever considered that you are just approximately 2 degrees of separation from a woman who has experienced violence? And that you are just a few degrees of separation from a woman who has experienced the devastating impacts of environmental degradation? Well, today, I am that woman who has experienced violence. And I'm also that woman who would like to try to show you how the two might be linked together. So I'm going to go back to my story, and I'm going to try to show you how they might be linked together. I don't remember being abandoned in an apartment when I was 2 years old, but this is what I was told. I spent most of my life as a ward of the government, and whilst times with my mother were unpredictable and fleeting, my most profound memories are of the times I spent with her. My mom was one of 12 children. Growing up, she experienced extreme economic deprivation. As an adult, my mom, still poor and uneducated, was a victim of chronic domestic violence. And as a child, I was forced to sit and watch my mother's brutal beatings. One partner held a knife to her neck and cut the skin as he threatened to kill her. Another partner pinned her down to the ground, placed a curtain rod over her throat, strangling her as she kicked and gasped for air. My mom's beatings were so horrific that by the end of an episode, she would oftentimes be unrecognizable. When I was 10 years old, one of my mother's violent partners kidnapped her. And for months, I didn't know if I would ever see her alive again. Somehow, though, my mom managed to escape. And within an hour of our reunion, I got a tattoo, an identical replica of the one etched on my mom's skin. You see, due to masculine systems of domination, my childhood was dangerous. But violence impacts women across the socioeconomic spectrum. However, it disproportionately impacts those who are more socially economically deprived, as it did in my life. But have you ever considered how violence against women and environmental degradation could be interconnected? What if I told you that both were deeply rooted in systems of power and patriarchal dominance? In 1974, Françoise Dubon devised the term ecofeminism, and she believed that patriarchal dominance was linked to both the degradation of the environment and the subjugation and oppression of women. Patriarchal dominance presupposes that men in positions of authority hold all of the power, and that they are superior over nature and women. Patriarchy does not encompass all men, however. Patriarchy is a system perpetuated by cultural constructs, political affiliations, and religious beliefs that both men and women are part of. We can further understand this through the concept of intersectionality, the idea that inequalities and oppression of marginalized groups, such as women of color, indigenous women, migrant women, differently abled women, individuals who identify as female two-spirited, or those living in poverty, are going to be disproportionately impacted. According to United Nations, approximately 1 billion women rely on forest ecosystem services for natural income and natural capital, including fuel wood, food, water, medicine, and natural resources for commodities. Throughout history and across generations, women have been considered the stewards of our land, possessing insights and wisdom about food production, resource management, and conservation. But there has been a patriarchal paradigm shift where men are increasingly making decisions on land use, which means more trees get cut down, which leads to habitat destruction, a loss of biodiversity, and an increase in violence against girls and women. Ecofeminists have long believed that these masculine systems of domination, exacerbated by neoliberalism, increases the exploitation of girls and women and nature by placing more value on monetary productivity and the commodification of our land and natural resources. And one ecofeminist, called Dr. Vandana Shiva, believed that this could lead to an eco-apartheid. What I know for sure from my own childhood experiences is that poverty, food insecurity, and a lack of resources often leads to unequal access to education and violence. Some of my early memories with my mom revolve around our shared experiences of food. When we lived in the countryside, we ate deer, squirrel, frog legs, which she said tasted like chicken, but they did not, and sometimes raccoon. I have vivid memories of going mushroom hunting with my mom. We'd spend the day in the woods, picking mushrooms, and placing our harvest in brown paper bags. When we got home, my mom would take the mushrooms, dust them in some flour, and then she would use the recycled grease that she kept in an old red Folgers coffee can on our stove to fry them up for dinner. But when my mom was forced to leave the countryside and move to town, her ways of knowing how to live off the land were challenged, and scarcity followed. So when I didn't have enough food growing up, my mom would take me out of school and we would go dumpster diving. My job was to jump into the dumpster, wade through all the rubbish, and look for glass bottles and aluminum cans. My mom and I would spend the day going from dumpster to dumpster to dumpster, desperately trying to fill as many plastic bags as possible. At the end of the day, my mom would take the glass and cans to our local grocery store, where she would exchange them for a modest sum of money. Back then, every penny held immense value. And whilst I didn't always know if I would have enough to eat growing up, thanks to these types of programs and welfare, I always managed to stave off hunger. But in other places around the world, food shortages are drastically on the rise. And this is thought to be linked to patriarchal systems, leading to habitat destruction, deforestation, unsustainable agricultural practices, and soil erosion, all exacerbated by climate change-induced droughts. Currently, in the Horn of Africa, 32 million people are facing a catastrophic food and hunger crisis and water crisis. In these communities, women and girls often have to walk long distances, sometimes for days, sometimes for weeks, to find fresh food and water. And the probability of them being physically or sexually harassed or coerced to exchange sex for food increases. Out of sheer desperation, due to the threat of starvation, little girls are being offered as child brides, and child marriages are on the rise. What I know for sure from my own childhood experiences is that survival often depends on the strength to endure unimaginable hardships. Today, at the age of 44, I'm afraid of the dark, a fear that's only amplified when I'm alone. For me, darkness represents a time where I lost my bodily autonomy and was subjected to unwanted intrusions from individuals who wielded power over me. Masculine systems of domination are often rooted in these unequal distributions of power. And we can see evidence of this not only in my own childhood experiences of exploitation, but also with Indigenous women who've experienced similar violations. Since the oil boom, pipeline installations in places such as Canada and the US have destroyed terrestrial habitats. They've altered our aquatic ecosystems, they've increased our carbon emissions, and they play a role in the increased violence against Indigenous women and gender diverse individuals. Currently in the US, the federal government holds most Native American land in trust, which means that the US government can give permission for resource extraction on native land. Resource extraction and pipelines are often routed through these rural areas near or on reservations. And non-regional workers employed by the pipelines often set up temporary housing encampments called man camps. As a result, Indigenous women live in fear for themselves and for their daughters, as local tribal law enforcement lack jurisdiction over non-Native men dwelling in man camps on the reservation. In 2015, man camps situated in Montana and North Dakota saw an influx of thousands of transient workers. And this was thought to be linked to an alarming 75% increase in the physical and sexual violence, sexual exploitation, murder, and the disappearance of Indigenous women and gender diverse individuals. What we know, thanks to human rights groups such as MMIWG, is that Indigenous women are 10 times more likely to be murdered. And 96% of these crimes are committed by non-Native perpetrators. We have a serious human rights issue that needs to be urgently addressed. And whilst everyone is impacted by environmental threats and everyone is impacted by natural resource depletion, women and girls are more vulnerable to these threats. So, what is the solution? The solution, as you might have imagined, is multifaceted. But one thing I know for sure as an educator who teaches about climate change and environmental degradation, and as a woman who has experienced both poverty and violence, one of the most obvious ways forward is through education. And there are 3 opportunities we can explore today. Number 1, major public educational campaigns. Educational campaigns have been used throughout human history to address vaccines, cessation of smoking, and even safe sex. Public campaigns can help raise awareness regarding the issues of violence against women perpetuated by environmental degradation and patriarchal dominance. Campaigns can help to build supportive networks between our community leaders, organizations, and religious groups to promote equity, women's rights, and environmental protection. Number 2, transformative environmental education. We need our curriculums to allow our youth to fall in love with nature. And this is because we have an ingrained human instinct to protect that which we love. Transformative environmental education allows individuals the agency to critically evaluate anthropogenic activity and their impacts on our ecological worlds and societies. By facilitating a solution-focused approach, our youth have the ability to develop strategies to combat challenges, resource extraction, air and water pollution, plastic waste, e-waste, and deforestation. Chief Seattle once said, "Humankind has not woven the web of life. We are but one thread within it. Whatever we do to the web, we do to ourselves. All things are bound together. All things connect." Environmental education helps to instill a sense of stewardship toward our land, and it's anchored in hope. And hope is packaged in the concepts of sustainable development, conservation, and zero carbon technologies. Number 3, equal access to education. So one of the only predictable and constant people in my life growing up was my TV mom, Oprah Winfrey. She taught me how to live a life anchored in grace, gratitude, and education. Oprah empowered me to believe that my way out of poverty and violence, it was simple. No matter where I was, all I had to do was get up, go to school, and get an education. And you know what? Oprah was right, and I'm living my solution. But not every girl has this opportunity. According to the United Nations, 130 million girls are denied their human right to education. Educating girls means our economies become stronger. Educating girls means there's less burden on our healthcare systems. And what I know for sure above all else is that educating women and girls, it's the right thing to do. So let us not sit idly by whilst violence and oppression continue to shatter the lives of women and girls around the world. Instead, let us, as a global community, unite courageously to dismantle patriarchal systems. Because as Dr. Vandana Shiva says, the liberation of earth, the liberation of women, The liberation of all humanity is the next step of freedom we need to work for. And it's the next step of peace we need to create.